What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, we're going to be sharing our top 5 areas to fish in December in 5 different regions of the country. Let's get right into it.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another edition here of Bass Fishing Declassified. Today we're going to be talking about the key areas to fish in the month of December in the Ozark area lakes. And guys, this is one of my favorite times of year to fish because you just don't have many people out on the water. It's really enjoyable to be out there. The fishing's usually pretty decent also in December. So we're going to talk about the key areas and what you need to look for. There's 2 primary locations that I fish in December. And the first one is what I call the middle of the coves or the middle of the creeks. And what I'm looking for is I'll go back into some of the larger coves and creeks on a lake, and I'll get my boat right in the middle of those creeks and coves, usually about 1/2 to maybe 2/3 of the way back in the coves and the creeks. And I start fishing in the smack dab middle of those coves and creeks. I just fan cast around out there in that open water. The depths really depend on the water visibility. A lot of times in the Ozark lakes, you've got a lot of old submerged timber tops. They're in anywhere between 20 to 40 foot of water. Those fish can suspend over those timber tops. Or if you're on a lake like Lake of the Ozarks where you don't have any timber, the shad will still congregate in the middle of those cove middles, and those fish will relate to those shad schools. So what I usually do is I go back into these areas here and I use water clarity as my gauge. If the water clarity is say greater than 4 foot, I'm keying on the 30 to 50 foot zone. And if the water visibility is less than 4 feet, I'm keying more on that say 10 to 25 foot zone. And I get in the middle of these areas and I try to pay close attention on my depth finder to where a lot of the activity's at. If I start seeing shad suspended 5 to 10 foot down, a lot of times I'll fan cast the area with a jerk bait. That's a real productive way to catch them. If they're a little bit deeper, I may go to a swim bait, just fan cast a swim bait everywhere out there. That's a really good way to catch them. And if it's really deep, say I'm fishing over the tops of submerged timber in 30 to 50 foot of water, a lot of times I'll just pitch a jigging spoon in and around those timber tops. That's a really good way to catch them. And when you find the fish like this, you usually catch more than one. They're usually grouped up into schools. So that's a really good technique to fish in the month of December. And one thing you want to look for is the areas of the lake that have a little bit cleaner water, which is normally the lower to the mid part of the lake. The second areas I look for are main lake and secondary points. Now, main lake and secondary points are key bass structures all year long, but in the month of December, they become extremely important because what you have is you've got a percentage of the bass that will suspend on these points, and you've got a percentage of the bass that use the bottom. And a lot of times the bass will suspend and use the bottom on the same points on both the main lake and secondary points. So what I like to look for is on days that have, say, low light conditions where it's cloudy, or if you have wind or rainy, that type of stuff, a lot of times in the month of December, you can catch fish like on crankbaits and jerk baits shallow on these points, just casting to the bank, fishing in less than 10 foot of water. These fish are active and they're aggressive, they're up shallow. And then on those same points on the days that maybe are a little bit brighter with not much wind, you can back out off of those point ends and sides and key on that 15 to 30 foot of water, again, with small swim baits, with jerk baits, with spoons, sometimes dragging a football head you got deeper. That's a really good way to catch them. But the thing about that makes points the #1 bass structure in the month of December is the diversity of water habitat that the fish have. The fish have close proximity to deep water. They have the ability to suspend. They have the ability to use the bottom. It's a really good magnet, and the bass will live on them all throughout the winter, particularly in the month of December. So that's my 2 options, guys. Try fish in the middle of the creeks, in the middle of the coves. Get out there on the main lake and the secondary points, and I can promise you guys catch a bunch of fish in December.
All right, everybody, so for December, finding the perfect location to catch bass can be kind of tricky because this is the time of the year that it's kind of hard to just use reaction baits and cover water and then just happen upon the fish. You actually need to be very deliberate with your presentation sometimes because the fish are just real lethargic and they're not willing to chase fast-moving baits. So it really comes down to map study. So my Navionics app here on my iPad is one of my favorite tools to find these locations that bass live. And on the TVA, one of and this is kind of consistent for many different reservoirs around the South. The first thing that I look for is the areas where those fish were in the fall. So, you know, late October all the way through November, those fish were following shad into the backs of creeks. So for instance here, we've got a shallow creek here on one of the TVA lakes. And so the fish would primarily be in the back of these creeks. So a creek like this, it'd be back here where the water is coming in, and the shad would congregate in those shallow flats, and the bass would be there too. But during December, when things start getting real cold and the water is dropping down to winter pool, so a lot of these lakes, the areas where they were in the fall are going to be completely high and dry. So what they'll do is they will pull out, and what I look for is the first available deep structure. So usually it's where a creek channel turns in towards the shoreline, creating a small bluff or steeper bank with a lot of rock. So in this situation right here, we've got that channel swing. We've got that creek channel that just butts up right against the shoreline. That is going to be the first area that these fish are going to start congregating. And that's where the deeper water is going to be, or at least the closest deep water to where they were in the fall. And then from there, you know, if they're not in that first channel swing, they may be in the very next. So just follow the creek channels out to those steeper banks where the creek channel touches the bank, and you should be able to find December fish. But having a good mapping source like Navionics app is critical during December.
My favorite area in the month of December to fish is actually an area that I'm going to target in January and February as well. This area can be located and fished on both highland and lowland reservoirs across the country, and that area is a ditch. We're going to go to the Navionics and Google Earth map and break down ditches to help you understand how to fish them so you can go put more fish in the boat in the month of December. Ditches are little roads that come off of creek channels. They can come off of your main river channels or creek channels, as we are right here up in a creek. So right up here we have a creek channel, and then this right here, this ditch is to me just considered another road that leads, for example, up here in a spawning flat. They can lead on flats, they can go in the back of coves, or they can be off of islands, and just there's so many different areas ditches can be. And as we have right here, so what this ditch is just a deeper waterway that leads into the back of this pocket. Now when you're looking at ditches, you on the flats, as we see right here, this is just a little rounded point. We have up here a flat. On your flat sides can have a transition. Right here we're going to see this ditch leads into, there's going to be grass on both sides. This lake has grass. But also with your ditches, you can have a rock transition, you can have standing timber, you can have other sources of cover. And what these fish use is these little roadways that lead in the back of these areas. Like I said, they're just roadways, so the fish will use the edges of the grass here to hide, and then of course when bait fish comes, or crawfish or brim, they will go out and ambush. So here's the same ditch that is now on a Google Earth image. So you see the deeper water that's coming right here, and right here you can see could be your ground, or as this lake has hydrilla, and the fish will use this piece of cover to hide as bait fish, crawfish are coming into this ditch that's leading from the creek channel. And so we're going to go to another image right here, and as you see, this one, the lake is drawn down and you see the deeper water, you see now the ground, and actually you see some of the more grass that's coming out. So now this right here is a bigger ditch, and I know we're going to get into another example here in the next image. This ditch here can be how your ditches can be in lowland reservoirs. Now this is on a highland reservoir lake, but when you're fishing lowland reservoirs, a lot of your ditches can be like this, as you know, on Sam Rayburn and Toledo Bend, those lakes that are more down there in the south and east Texas. Now my next example can be still on lowland reservoir bodies of water, but they're also for highland as well. So here can be some other example of ditches. Now this creek right here is right off the main lake. So on the south side right here, as you see, you have these rounded points, and then here comes this water, this deeper section right here. So these right here can be considered ditches. So once again, you have your creek that's coming in right here, and this is what I like to just call a road that's going to just be leading off of the creek. So bait fish can be pushed up here, and then of course that's where your bass are going to follow. Both sides of these ditches right here can, of course, have grass, can have standing timber, rock transitions. I didn't talk about it earlier, but there might be brush piles in some of these ditches. Some of your local anglers that know this real well will put man-made brush piles in these ditches. Now, even up here on the north side, these can be ditches as well. These are more of your sneaky ones, I like to say. So you have these rounded points, and these are just some flat, round points. But right here where my cursor's at, that can be considered a ditch. Going down the way here, this is another area considered a ditch. So now, once again, when you're looking for these ditches, just look for a change. Okay, so once again, if there's grass on this point, then it goes up here, and all of a sudden there's a grass edge. That right there's a ditch and is a spot for fish to hide as your bait and crawls, brim are coming into this little road right here off the creek channel. So they'll hide in this grass edge or brush pile, standing timber, whatever it is, and use this as a spot to eat. And they like to say, once again, they'll hang out in these areas in the winter months, because after this they'll start working their ways into the spawning areas. Now let's get to Jonny, as his top December area is going to be rounded points, which relates actually to these ditches, as you might have heard me talk about rounded points.
Really quick, I want to let you guys know about the Black Friday deals that are happening right now on fishthemoment.com. If you head to our website and check out the Black Friday page, you're going to see that we have 40 to 45% off all of our Fish the Moment sonar settings guides. These guides are my personal settings for all these different fish finders that I spent months figuring out to give you the clearest and best image of both cover and fish on these different fish finders. Instead of wasting hours and hours trying to figure out all the settings yourself, get these sonar guides and you're going to have the fast track to getting crystal clear images on your fish finder right away. We also published a brand new product, the Fish the Moment Sonar Interpretation Guide, which has images of what fish look like, different species of fish, different species of bait, cover, structure, all these different things that you can use to interpret what you're seeing on your fish finder. Don't be confused about what you're seeing on your screen anymore. Use these example images to know exactly what you're looking for and what you're looking at so you can put more fish in the boat this upcoming year. Now back to the video. For my top area, I'm going to be covering a piece of structure that you can find on both highland and lowland reservoirs, making it a very versatile structure in December. You can fish in pretty much every state across the country. This is going to be a rounded point. Rounded points are a great offshore piece of structure because they offer fish a place to feed in December, but also allows them to pull back into deeper water if they need to as the air temperatures start to drop and water temperatures get into the 40s or even the high 30s. A lot of times in the summer when you fish offshore, you're looking for very steep breaks where you have a creek channel running up against a flat. This is called a ledge. Or you might be fishing channel swing points on the main lake. However, in December, the bass are not really set up near these super sharp drops as much as they are long, gradual sloping pieces of structure. A rounded point is one of these. What you're looking for are areas where a point extends very far out in the middle of the lake with a gradual depth change that eventually drops off into a creek channel or a deeper part of the lake. You don't want a sudden sharp drop though. You want it to be super gradual. And the bass are usually going to set up in anywhere from, let's say, 10 feet of water out to 45 feet of water, depending on your water visibility. If your water visibility is between, let's say, 1 to 2 foot, then those bass will set up in the 8 to 12 foot range. If the water visibility is between, let's say, 3 to 5 feet, they might be anywhere from 15 to 30 feet of water. And if you have ultra clear water, let's say 6 or 7 foot of visibility, sometimes those bass can set up as deep as 40 or 45 feet. The way you determine where these fish are on these rounded points is to graph for the bait fish. Bait fish are going to be key for locating bass offshore in the winter time. Now I'm going to be looking for either gizzard shad or threadfin shad that are schooled up and swimming around these offshore points. If you see the bait fish on your fish finder in 15 to 20 feet, you want to look for cover on these rounded points in that 15 to 20 foot zone. If they're out in 45 feet of water, you're going to want to look for cover in 45 feet of water. The two pieces of cover that I focus on mainly on these rounded points are going to be rock piles and brush piles. Brush piles are going to hold the biggest bass you're going to catch on these rounded points, and then the rock piles usually are going to hold your numbers of fish. So depending on what you're going for, graph for brush piles if you want big fish. If you want numbers, find the rock piles. My go-to baits when I'm fishing in any depth range on these rounded points really, and in any type of cover, are going to be either my go-to Fish the Moment offshore jig, which is a 5/8 ounce football jig. This was my top December bait I talked about in the video earlier, and for whatever reason in December, I get some really big bites on a football jig, and I catch more fish on a football jig than I do on a jerkbait or an Alabama rig, which is going to be my go-to bait once the water temperatures start to really get into the low 40s and high 30s in January and February. So as long as the water temperatures are like, let's say 48 degrees and above, go with a football jig, drag it around the brush piles and the rock piles, you can catch some really big fish. Now, there are some days when the bass are going to be positioned a little bit higher in the water column and suspended around those rocks or the brush piles, and I find that a great bait to target those fish is going to be a small finesse swim bait. Again, the Alabama rigs, the jerk baits, don't seem to produce as well for me in the month of December, and so I'm going to be going with a 3-inch megabass spark shad on a 4x4 tackle, 1/4 ounce ball head. I'm just going to cast this swim bait around the brush, around the rocks, try to keep it 3 to 4 feet above the cover I'm fishing, and reel it super slow. I may even go up to a 3/8 ounce size jig head if I'm fishing super deep, like 30 or 40 feet of water. But the key is to just barely reel that swim bait, move it as little as possible, and just float it over the top of that cover, and those bass are not going to be able to resist it. I'm pairing the football jig with a Denali 7'2" heavy power fast action worm and jig rod with 16-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon and a Black Max reel, and I'm pairing the little Megabass Spark Shad on a Denali 7'4" medium heavy fast action multi-purpose spinning rod, a long spinning rod to make long casts so I can fish these offshore areas and pull those fish away from the cover when I hook them. And I'm gonna be pairing that with some Sunline 10-pound braided line with a 6-pound FC Sniper Sunline fluorocarbon leader and an Abu Garcia Max Pro reel. It's like $30. Got them over at Academy Sports, I think I got that one. So I like my cheaper reels with a little bit higher quality rods. Works great for me, and that's how I target my favorite piece of structure in December, the rounded point.
If you live in the upper portion of the country, you're definitely starting to feel the effects of winter rolling in. In my neck of the woods right now, depending on what lake you're on, you may have hard water or you still may have some open water. But the month of December generally is going to leave very few people with some open water fishing. But again, if you live in Illinois, Indiana, the Northeast, there's still a lot of places where you're going to be able to get out on the water and catch some big fish because the winter period is one of the best times to do it. For me, my favorite area to fish are deep saddles. Specifically, what I'm talking about are two areas where you have a high point. It could be an island, two islands that are connected by a saddle. It could be a point to an island. It could be two underwater humps. The key here is you have two high spots that then has a lower thin piece of connecting land, and these become great wintering locations for both largemouth and smallmouth. Generally speaking, the most ideal locations will have a saddle that's got a flat portion on top that's generally going to be 15 to 30 feet of water and then has very steep sides. That's a big key in terms of locating the fish. What you have there is an area where the fish are going to sit in winter for the majority of the time on top of that saddle where you have the flat portion. But when there does come a school of shad or a school of bait fish come by, they can pull off the top of that saddle, chase the bait fish into the sides of the two humps, and therefore it becomes a big, easy meal for those fish. Another key area that I'm always looking for when I'm looking at saddles is a small flat point or small flat shelf that comes off one of the two humps or the two island sides. These generally are going to be good areas for the fish to sit. It basically sets up the same way as the actual saddle portion, that flat portion of the land that connects the two humps. But if you can find a small shelf that comes off one of the two humps, at that point, what it's creating is a much more defined location for you to be making your cast. The fish will be using that the same way that they're using the top of the saddle. and therefore it becomes just a high percentage spot to fish. Bait wise, you're talking about a lot of different presentations that can work. Specifically, if you have a shallower saddle, your jerk baits can be an excellent choice. Your swim baits can be an excellent choice. But as soon as you start moving off into that deeper water, that 20 to 35 foot range, you're going to be talking about some of your blade baits, some of your snap jigs, some of your bottom baits that are going to be baits that really stay in the strike zone and mimic those dying fish. But don't think, guys, if you live in the northern part of the country, just because we have cold falling water doesn't mean you can't get out and catch some fish. Sometimes the hardest part is actually getting onto the water itself. For me, I'll have some lakes here in Wisconsin and Minnesota that will remain open for some significant period of time, but I need to go to the ramp. I need to carry some salt with me. I need to carry a shovel with me. I need to be able to make sure I can get the boat in the water down the ramp, but at the same time, you got to worry about those ramps freezing up after a boat or two goes in. So you want to make sure you've got the correct equipment to be able to get your boat back out of the water. But I'm telling you, you can get some excellent wintertime fishing in by going and hitting some deep water saddles.
And those are our top 5 areas to fish in December. Hopefully you learned something from this video. If you did, leave a comment down below letting us know what you learned, and also leave some comments if you like the format of this video. We're still starting out this channel, pretty much brand new to all of us, so let us know if there's anything you feel like we could add or improve on down in the comments below. Also make sure to subscribe to the Bass Fishing Declassified YouTube channel for more great tips coming every single week to this channel from all the anglers you saw here today. Thanks again for checking out this video. We'll see you on the next one.